Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 8 of our Toys and Joys dump truck and pup trailer build. Well, last week's show took 3 days to film, as I stated at the end of the program, and that was to get all of the wheels and the rims done. But we're going to move on now and go back to some of the smaller parts of the build, and it's all going to start with the brake cylinders of the rear axle assembly. Well, we can see the brake cans over here on sheet 7 of our prints, and it is made from a 3/8 of an inch dowel. Guys, this measurement right here at the top, this is 3/8 of an inch. So all we're going to do is measure down on a squared off piece of 3/8 of an inch diameter dowel. We're going to measure down 3/8 and place a little mark. And at this point, using our miter box, we're going to mark, or cut rather, the 45-degree angle that you see here on the drawing. Once we're done that, we can just mark it at 9/16 of an inch and cut it off square, again, using the miter box. Well, we can now glue in our brake cans, and in hindsight, I may have jumped the gun in gluing this all together because it's going to be a pretty tight glue up. But it's not that big of a deal, really. We can see on the drawing that the brake cans show here at the back, the 45-degree cut is actually lined up with the bottom edge of our axles. So if we measure this distance right here, this is 3/8 of an inch. So using a 3/8 spacer block or setup block, we can easily get the proper distance from our rear axle spacers and get these drums glued into place. Guys, do them one at a time. And as well, don't be afraid to clamp your model in your bench vise in ways that may not seem, secure to you. This is very secure. This is not going anywhere. If you're going to do this sort of thing, which can help with assembly, just be absolutely certain that you don't have pieces sticking out. If there's extra pieces sticking out, you could break the model at this point. So for now, we can just carefully clamp it in place and glue our brake cans in. Well, the next piece that I want to make will be the drive shaft. We can see that here on the general views page of our prints. So the first thing I've done is I have got myself a piece of 1/4 inch diameter dowel, and I've cut it to 3 3/4 of an inch, which is the final length. How did I get some 1/4 inch walnut dowel? Well, I had some thicker 3/8 walnut dowel that I had made in the shop here, and believe it or not, I used a block plane and planed it down and then sanded it to its final dimension. Now guys, what we have on the end of this drive shaft is 5/16 of an inch in from the end. It is actually only 1/8 of an inch. So what we need to do is reduce the end 5/16 of an inch in. We need to reduce it down to 1/8. In order to do that, we need to take 1/16 of an inch off all the way around. And we're going to do it here at the table saw. So I have my blade raised to a height of 1/16. And what we're going to do is we're going to make multiple passes, rotating our dowel as we go to get that shoulder cut and get it down to its final dimension. We can rotate it then, turn our dowel 180 degrees, and repeat the process on the other side. So we now want to put the chamfer on the end of these drive shafts. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, guys. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of our sanding blocks, clamp to the bench here, and we're going to just rotate this drive shaft very carefully here and just apply a little bit of a chamfer. It doesn't have to be perfect. Even our 1/8 of an inch extensions here are not perfect. Now there is an alternative way you could do this, guys. If you wanted to, you could drill shallow holes here in the end of a 1/4 inch piece of dowel and then glue in a piece of 1/8 of an inch dowel. That as well would work, and that would give you the opportunity to add this chamfer before your 1/8 dowels are actually inserted. Well, with the drive shaft done, we have 2 pieces here to mount it in place. We made these pieces earlier. That's the front drive shaft support and the drive shaft mount. But there's one more piece that we need to make, guys, and that is the front drive shaft connector. So what I've done is I've got a piece of 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch walnut here. I'm going to take a 1/2 inch circle template and round off the top end of it. Once we get that done, we're going to sand it over at the belt sander, and then we're going to cut it to length at the table saw. And now with that piece made, we can very carefully, you don't need a lot of glue here, guys. Just put a little bit here around the ring of our drive shaft mount, and we will mount this now. Get that glue bottle out of the way. We're going to mount this onto the piece we just made. It gets mounted just below that top arc of our circle template that we drew and centered on our piece. Make sure you clean up your squeeze out, and then we can let this set up. And at this point, we have all the pieces that we need in order to mount our rear drive shaft. So we're just going to do a test fit here. I want to see how this is going to work out. So this piece is going to get glued on to our rear axle assembly, just like this. Our rear axle will sit in there and then go up to the front end where we'll have this axle support glued to our frame spacer. Yeah, that's going to work out just fine. Now, if anything here, I think that my axle might be a little long. You don't want to glue this in, the actual axle itself, because we still have the pivoting motion of our rear assembly here. And although it's not much of a pivoting action, it's enough that if you glue that drive shaft in, you're going to eliminate it being able to pivot at all, and you'll probably just end up breaking the drive shaft. So let's get this glued in and we'll see how it looks after that. Now, depending on the tolerances of your pieces and how close they're cut, you may have to do some adjustment here. I ended up having to sand a little bit off of each end, but this drive shaft will just slide into this ring at the rear axle assembly and then just sit here in this bracket. It free floats here, and that way the pivot of this rear axle doesn't get changed or hindered in any way. So there you go. There is the rear axle now done. Well, the next thing that I want to do is I want to glue the mud flaps onto the mud flap frame. There's really no indication as to how this frame goes, but I can tell you that it will get mounted with the mud flaps on the flat surface and the tapers facing the front of the truck and the ground, or the lower end of the vehicle. You can see this on the cover page right here at the back. This section right here, this is our taillight panel, and we have earlier made the 4 taillights using a plug cutter, but there is absolutely no indication anywhere on these drawings as to where these lights go. Even if we look here at the back of the cover page, we can see that here is our tail light panel, but there are no protruding lights that are 1/16 of an inch thick. There is nothing protruding on that panel. So I'm not exactly sure where those lights go. So I'm just going to use an adjustable square here and line them up along the back end of this panel and glue them in place. And once you get it finished, you end up with an assembly that looks like this. Now, we're not going to glue it on just yet. We're going to put this aside and keep it safe. This is pretty fragile. We still have some handling to do of the entire model. But that is your mud flap assembly for the rear end of the vehicle. Well, even though I already spent 3 days on the wheels, I really want to get them done. So I have a whole bunch of axle pegs here that are gluing up, and we need to move on to the center hubs. Now, I know that I've already made the rims, but if we look here on the drawing, we can see that they show a rear wheel cover. Now, guys, this is a little bit of a strange piece. So what I've done is I have made or milled or cut a bunch of pieces of stock that are 1/4 of an inch thick, and they are 1.5 by 1.5 inches. These will be all of our wheel covers. Guys, I'm not going to go through the process of this because it's exactly the same thing as making the wheels. We are going to mark the center and set up our drill press with a stop and the fence. We're going to drill a 1/2 inch Forstner bit hole that is 1/8 of an inch deep. And then once we get all of that done on all of the pieces, we're going to follow through with a through hole that is 1/4 of an inch in diameter. Once we get that finished, we're going to turn all of these over at the lathe to a final dimension of 1 3/16. And we want to make sure that they're going to fit inside of each one of our rims. So that is the first step. So let me get that done, and then I'm going to show you how to drill all of these holes that it shows here on the drawings. Well, to drill these holes, what I've done is I have photocopied this template or pattern from the plans. I have adhered it to a piece of 1/8 thick hardboard, and I have just a scrap. You can use anything, a piece of plywood. It doesn't matter how big, as long as it's big enough to fit this pattern on. And right in the middle, I've drilled a 1/4 inch diameter hole. In that 1/4 inch hole, I have my trusty brass pin that I use for working on my wheels. And we're just going to slide this pattern over top, just like this. And now we're going to head over to the drill press. Well, over here at the drill press, I have installed a 1/8 diameter brad point drill bit, and I have set my stop so that if I align this block of scrap here against the fence and against the stop, the drill bit contacts exactly in one of these marked holes. Now guys, I have also placed a mark here at this top right corner to tell me and remind me that this has to be against the fence and against the stop block. That way we always get the same results and the drill bit is always striking in the same point. So all we want to do now, we're just going to double check this to make sure that it lines up. And once we're happy with that, we're going to drill the first hole. Now that that's done, we're going to rotate this to the next one and drill the next hole, and so on until we get all of the holes drilled. And what this becomes is a marking template for our holes. So all I want to do now is place one of our turn discs in here, our wheel covers. I want to place it over top of this 1/4 inch piece of brass rod. Guys, I've got it so that the outside is facing up. That way, if there's any blowout, it's going to be to the back and it's not going to ruin our piece. And all we want to do is lay our template on here, and using a 0.5 mechanical pencil and making sure that nothing shifts, I'm going to mark each one of these holes. Once you get that marked, you can remove your template here. You can see they're all marked, and all I'm going to do is the exact same process that we did with our template. I'm going to place it so that our back and our side, our marking is showing us that it has to be against the fence and the stop. I'm going to line up our drill bit. I'm going to drill all these holes, rotating as I go in order to get them all perfectly spaced around our rim. And once you get them all drilled, you should have something that looks like this. So we're going to give this a bit of a sanding on our sandpaper mounted on MDF, and we're going to glue it in place in our wheels. And they end up looking like this. How spectacular is that? This one isn't glued in, so it's not quite centered, but it does look great. So there you go, guys. Do them for all of the outside wheels for both the trailer and for the dump truck, and glue them in place. Well, I have them all drilled and I have them all done. I just have one more to glue in, but I think I may have goofed here. And what I'm talking about is these drop-down wheels, or the wheels from the drop-down axle assembly. Now, if we look here on the cover page, we can see that we have our wheel covers inserted in these wheels. But somebody, I'm not going to mention any names, but his initials are me, made rims here. So that's okay. I'm not going to really complain. This plan or this set of plans doesn't really lay out about the wheels. It's more about purchasing the pre-made wheels on these plans. So to keep everything proportionate, I'm still going to keep these the way that they are. I'm not taking those rims out of there, but I'm going to use the exact same process that we just used to make the original wheel covers here for the larger wheels, and we're going to do it on the smaller wheels. We can use the same drilling jig. The only thing we have to do is make another marking template. And that would be this right here. So in order to get this so that it fits within our 1-inch hole, guys, I've had to photocopy the original at 85%. And that gives us an exact fit in here. And it's also shrunk everything down. So instead of the half-inch hole being drilled in the middle, the 1/4-inch through and the half-inch stopped hole, we're going to drill a 7/16 hole. And instead of 1/8, these holes here will be 7/64. So it's the exact same process. We're going to get those smaller ones made. We only have to make 2 of them, and then we'll glue those in place as well. And there you go. There is all of the dually wheels and the 2 drop downs. And we can see that these look proportionate to these. Like, they look just great. So guys, if you make a mistake as I did where I misinterpreted what there was on the plans, that's okay. You can overcome it. Don't think that you did something wrong or that you can't fix it. There's always a way that you can step in and learn from that mistake and try a new method and have you branch out. In this case, I had to reduce a pattern. No harm, no foul. Everything looks great. The last thing that we want to do for these wheels is in every one, this 1/4-inch diameter hole that we have in the center, we're going to take this over to the drill press, and using a twist bit, not a brad point, we're going to enlarge these holes to 9/32 of an inch. And what that will do is give us just enough room and play with our shop-made axle pins to be able to allow these wheels to turn perfectly. So drill them all out to 9/32, and then we can call all of these wheels in particular done. Well, at this point, you want to start working on temporarily mounting your wheels. And by temporarily, what I mean by that is you are not going to glue in the axle pins, just in case we need to remove them at some point in time for clamping purposes or what have you. So making your homemade axle pins, we've already been through this process earlier in the build. You want to sand down the 1/2-inch heads until they fit right down into that 1/2-inch drilled recess, just like that. And they should fit in there nice and snug, but have a little bit of wiggle room because they're not going to get glued in. That's what's going to keep your wheel on there and allow it to spin. From there, guys, what you need to do is we're going to sand down these shop-made axle pins until they're a nice fit in our drilled holes in our axles. You don't want it super tight, but you want to be able to push it in to give you room to get glue in there. Cut them to length, get all of your wheels temporarily mounted. Obviously the front ones will not be because we haven't worked on those yet, but get all of your wheels temporarily mounted on our dump truck frame, and then we can carry on. Well, I figure that seeing we're already on a roll, I'm going to take care of the front wheels now and get them out of the way and done. Now, I had said before that the interior of this is a different animal, and after the little mix-up here on our drop-down axle assembly, I decided to have a better look at the plans. And if we look here at the cover page, we can see that there is absolutely no mistaking that there is a rim that goes in here, just like there is on the back tires. So in the same fashion as I did the other ones, I already went through it on last week's video, I've made myself a couple of rims to go inside our front tires. And we're going to glue those in place, and then we're going to move on to the wheel covers. Now, they are very similar to our process of these ones right here. And just like we did these back ones, we're going to do the exact same thing. We are going to turn them, we're going to drill them, except they're not going to be 1/4 inch thick stock. They're going to be 1/2 inch thick. And once you get them drilled and turned to the point that these ones here are, then I'll show you what to do with the next step. And what you end up with is 2 of these. Guys, these are identical to the wheel covers that we made for the rear wheels, except they're thicker. They're so identical, in fact, that if you wanted to, you could save yourself a little bit of time and you can actually use the marking template that we made for the rear wheels for these front ones because they are exactly the same. So if we look here on the drawing, we can see that the bottom end is 3/8 of an inch thick. However, what if your drilling was off? What if it sits a little differently? What if, what if? So we're not going to go by that measurement. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place these rims, or these wheel covers rather, inside of the rims, and we're going to spin them in place. And we're going to mark them with a pencil held there against the rim. This will give us the marking for the very top edge. I'll just show you this here. The very top edge of the rim that we turned. So what we want to do now, according to our drawing here, is we want to taper this from just inside of where these holes are, taper it down almost on a 45 degree. It's a little bit more than that, but we're going to taper that down until we reach this line. And we're just going to do that over at the lathe. I really don't think that we need a video of it. I'm going to get this one shaped and then I'll show you what it should look like. And essentially this is what you end up with. You can see the taper there. And guys, this was just done with a skew chisel on the lathe. If you don't have a lathe, you can very easily cut these circles. Because of this 1/4 inch, you can chuck this up in your cordless drill on a 1/4-20 bolt. Just nut it on each side to hold it securely, and you can sand it until it gets round into the shape you want. And then with a sanding block, just hold it on the angle until you get the shape of the wheel cover that you want. And when we put this in place here, look at that. Look at how beautiful that is. That is spectacular. So there you go. That is the front wheel covers made with that raised front, I'm not even sure what you'd call it, hub almost, but it looks great. So we can get the second one shaped up now in the same way that we just did this one. And that'll be it for the wheels on this vehicle. And one thing I forgot to mention is once you get this all glued in place, you can drill that center out again to a 9/32 to be able to accommodate your shop-made axle pins. And we can just do like we did with the rear wheels and set them temporarily in place. And unfortunately, once again, that's about all the time that we have for this week. We have made some amazing progress, though. Guys, those wheels take time. This is my 4th day working on them, but I'm quite pleased with the results. They look great. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the process, guys. Put on a bit of music, relax, just do a bit at a time. Don't worry about how long it takes or how many days or hours you're putting into it. Just do it and just relax. It's a great learning process and it's a load of fun. So get all those other parts made, get them out of the way, get them finished, get this thing assembled to this point, and then we can carry on. Guys, this build is going to really pick up pace now because a lot of the small finicky pieces are pretty much done. There will be some here and there along the way, but for the most part, we have a lot of those small finicky pieces completed. So we're going to get moving into making this thing look like more than just a chassis. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We've got a great audience base here, and I'm seriously hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of this, guys. It's a load of fun. I'd love to have you on board. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you're enjoying this whole series and following along at home. I hope you found this informative and that you learned something. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.